I'm Cassandra Vale. I'm 28 years old, and tonight I stand in the middle of a glittering ballroom bathed in golden light, wearing a crimson designer gown that costs more than most people's cars. The pearls around my neck once belonged to my grandmother. My heels click softly on the marble as I step toward the microphone. I feel hundreds of eyes on me. Whispers fade. My breath catches. And I smile, because what I'm about to say will change everything. Just 6 months ago, I was a broken version of myself, branded a failure, cast out by my own family, and forced into a marriage they thought would humble me. "You need to remember where you came from," my mother had said, lacing her cruelty into her pearls of wisdom. "This marriage is what you deserve." But what they didn't know was the secret my so-called nobody husband carried. He wasn't the man they thought he was, and neither was I. I'd spent a lifetime playing by their rules, performing their version of perfection. But tonight, that ends. Tonight, I reclaim my voice, not as their daughter, not as their shame, but as a woman who rose from betrayal with fire in her veins. Before I tell you how I exposed a dynasty built on control, lies, and fear, I have a question for you. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people who should have lifted you up? If so, this story is for you. Hit that like and subscribe, because what comes next is the truth they tried to bury. This is the night everything changed, and it begins with a microphone. To understand how everything fell apart, you first need to know how it all looked from the outside. I grew up in Harridan Hollow, an exclusive neighborhood nestled in the hills above San Marino. Our estate wasn't just a home, it was a legacy. Gated, pristine, protected. My father, Victor Vale, had turned a modest construction company into Vale Holdings, a corporate powerhouse. My mother, Celeste, curated our lives like a luxury brand. Everything, our clothes, our parties, our smiles, had to be flawless. Inside that house, there were rules. Vale women stood straight, spoke elegantly, and never displayed weakness. My mother used to whisper, "Posture, Cassandra," while pressing a manicured finger between my shoulder blades at galas. Vale women never slouch. I was groomed to be the perfect daughter. By age 7, I could play Chopin. By 9, I knew 5 languages of cutlery. By 12, I was navigating cocktail parties like a diplomat. My days were filled with horseback riding, etiquette classes, charity functions carefully timed for press coverage, and shopping appointments with stylists who referred to me as a walking investment. But what none of the photographers saw was the cost. My younger sister Elise watched me from the shadows, absorbing everything, copying my every move. We weren't just sisters, we were contestants. Whoever fit the mold best earned our mother's affection. For a moment. And then the spotlight would shift again. Praise became pressure. Affection turned into currency. Even our mother's best friend, Camille Langdon, a woman with more Botox than warmth, monitored our behavior like a watchdog. She'd smile at me across the room, then whisper to my mother about who I danced with or how many times I laughed. I learned early that everything was being measured. That's the world I came from. Not a family, a performance. And I was the star. Until I tried to break the script. For most of my life, I did exactly what was expected of me. I walked the tightrope of family reputation without slipping. Graduated from Stanford, earned an MBA from Columbia. I was poised, no, predestined to slide seamlessly into Vale Holdings. But deep down, I knew that life wasn't mine. What I wanted was simple, a boutique, a space of my own. A modern, sustainable fashion studio, something elegant, curated, and personal. I didn't want to be another name on a boardroom plaque. I wanted to create beauty. When I pitched the idea to my father, he looked up from his scotch and barely blinked. "We're builders, Cassandra, not shopkeepers." He smirked as he flipped through my business plan. "But fine, consider it a lesson." He wired the money like it was charity, a loan dressed as a leash. And still, I was proud. For 3 glorious months, C. Vale Atelier came alive. The boutique was a dream. Italian lighting, minimalist interiors, racks of future couture. Influencers noticed. Fashion editors came early. My business partner, Serena Wexley, was poised and brilliant. She handled operations. I built the brand. It was working. It was real. Until the phone rang. "The accounts are empty, Miss Vale," our accountant said, "and there's $500,000 in unpaid vendor orders." I felt the floor fall out from under me. Serena was gone, disappeared overnight. What she left behind was a trail of falsified records, stolen capital, and me holding the blame. The media chewed through the story like wolves. "Heiress duped in boutique scam." My name splashed across every page. The worst part? My family didn't defend me. They used my failure as ammunition, my apartment gone, my accounts frozen, my car replaced with a 10-year-old Toyota, and a lecture about earning respect. They didn't just abandon me, they humiliated me, and I let them. Until I decided not to. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember the silence when I walked into the living room. My father sat in his leather chair, his expression carved from stone. My mother perched beside him, icy and unreadable. And standing by the fireplace was a man I'd never seen before. Gray suit, neutral tie. Not even a hint of a smile. "This is Julian Hart," my mother said. "He's agreed to marry you." I actually laughed, out loud. Was this a joke? But no one else was laughing. "You've humiliated this family," my father said, his voice clipped and calm. "This marriage is a solution." "A solution?" I repeated. "To what? Your embarrassment?" He didn't answer. He just tapped the manila folder on the table. "You agree to this marriage and you'll get a job at Vale Holdings, a small apartment, a life. You refuse, you're cut off. No support, no references, nothing." My mother leaned in, faux concern painted on her face. "Victor's heart can't take another scandal, Cassandra." It wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum. I ran to Elise's room, needing to breathe, to understand. She already knew. "They've been planning it," she whispered. "It's not about redemption. It's about control. They want the story to look like they saved you." I felt sick. 3 days later, I met Julian Hart again. We had dinner at a forgettable restaurant. He wore the same gray suit, drove a modest car, lived in a quiet apartment with nothing remarkable about it. "I know this isn't ideal," he said, watching me scan his barren living room. "But we can make something functional." "Functional?" I snapped, not even pretending this is about love or compatibility. He didn't flinch. "Would you rather I lie?" I stared at him, this stranger my family had chosen, and something didn't add up. His tone, his eyes, his control. He wasn't what he appeared to be, and I'd soon find out just how deep the deception went. There was something about Julian Hart that didn't quite fit the story my parents told. He wore plain suits, drove a used car, lived in a quiet third-floor apartment with beige walls and second-hand furniture. He always spoke in calm, clipped tones. No drama, no charm, just practical. Too practical. And yet, little things started to unravel the mask. A watch that, upon closer inspection, wasn't just expensive, it was exclusive. The kind of timepiece that isn't bought, it's earned. Weekend meetings that lasted hours, packages with global courier labels signed and vanished into his locked home office. Conversations held in a tone of command far more powerful than someone in junior finance. One night, after a particularly grueling day of filing spreadsheets and fetching coffee for people who used to ask for my autograph at galas, I found myself pacing. I couldn't sleep. And then I heard it. Julian's voice. Deep, assertive, strategic. Not the man I shared twin beds and awkward silences with. "Tell legal the Shanghai acquisition must close by Monday. Allocate the reserves. Wilson handles the press. Use the strategic synergy language." The voice didn't match the gray suit, or the grocery store coffee machine, or the plain beige life. It matched a boardroom, a billion-dollar portfolio, power. I followed the sound to his office. I expected the door to be locked, like always. But this time, it opened. What I stepped into wasn't just a workspace. It was a command center. 3 glowing monitors tracked global markets in real time. A Bloomberg terminal blinked in the corner. Financial books, heavy, dense, annotated, lined the shelves. Charts, data, algorithms. Everything perfectly organized. And in the center, Julian Hart, no department store suit, just tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled, headset still in place. He saw me, didn't panic, didn't hide. Just ended his call with a calm, "I'll finalize the report tomorrow." Then he turned to me and said, "I suppose it's time we have a real conversation." I stood frozen in the doorway, still in my wrinkled pajamas, staring at the man I had been told was a nobody. Julian Hart wasn't just hiding something. He was someone else entirely. "Who are you?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of machines tracking millions in real time. He moved slowly without urgency. He opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out a worn magazine. He slid it across the table toward me. It was an old issue of Forbes. The cover story, "The Phantom Kingmaker of Wall Street," and in bold print beneath the title, "J.H., the billionaire investor who built an empire in the shadows." Inside was a feature on Hart Capital, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm known for toppling outdated industries and building new ones from the ground up. Its founder, never photographed, never public, hidden in plain sight. My fingers trembled as I read. "You're J.H.?" I whispered. He nodded. "Julian Hart, founder, CEO, current valuation, about $4.2 billion. The world tilted. All those times I thought I was smarter, sharper, more cultured than this stranger in gray. I hadn't married a humble financial consultant. I'd married one of the most powerful and invisible players in global finance. "Why the deception?" I demanded. "Why live like this? Why marry me under false pretenses?" He didn't dodge the question. "I built everything from nothing," he said. "No family fortune, just grit, scholarships, algorithms I wrote in my dorm. But the wealth changed people. Everyone started wanting something, access, funding, connection. So I hid who I was, to protect what mattered." "But me?" I pushed. "Was this some experiment? A Mizian?" "At first, yes," he said quietly. "I knew your father. I wanted to observe the Vale family, see how they worked behind the scenes. When the marriage proposal came, it was a calculated decision." He paused. "But then, I met you." I stared at him, heart pounding. "So I was a business deal," I said. "No," he replied softly. "You were the first person who didn't want anything from me because you thought I had nothing to give." And somehow that hurt worse than any lie. The silence between us that night felt endless. I sat there, magazine still in hand, staring at the man I thought I knew. "I need you to tell me everything," I said finally. "All of it." And he did. Julian laid it out like a case file. A timeline of deceit, manipulation, and sabotage, planned not by an enemy, but by my own family. My so-called partner, Serena, wasn't a lone fraudster. She had been recruited, funded, vetted through a shadow network my parents controlled. He pulled up transaction records, donation trails, charitable grants from my mother's foundation that ended up in Serena's shell accounts, emails between my father's fixer, Warren DuPont, and Serena under a different alias, meeting logs, phone taps, surveillance summaries. "This wasn't about your boutique failing," Julian said. "It was about making sure you never flew too far from the nest, about cutting your wings before you even knew you had them." The truth was a bitter pill. I had been set up, framed, not for a crime, but for a downfall, because I dared to want something of my own. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "What's in this for you?" Julian didn't hesitate. "Because I've lived surrounded by liars for too long, and when I saw you lose everything and still refuse to break, I realized you were the only person who ever looked at me without agenda. A beat passed. And because I want to be your partner now, not in arrangement, in truth. The next morning, our modest apartment became a war room. Julian cleared 2 weeks from his schedule. Whiteboards lined the walls. Financial documents replaced the art. Takeout boxes piled up next to strategy blueprints. He called in Grace Moreno, his chief of strategy and one of the most intimidating women I've ever met. She studied my failed business model, my projections, my sourcing choices. Her verdict? You weren't the problem, Cassandra. You were the threat. And that's when it clicked. My parents didn't fear my failure. They feared my success. And now, we were going to give them both. The invitation arrived wrapped in ivory paper, sealed in gold foil. Mr. and Mrs. Victor Vale request the honor of your presence for their 35th anniversary gala. Black tie, Seasons Ballroom, 7 p.m. sharp. Julian read it with a faint smile. They're calling the audience back for Act 3. I looked at him across the table. Then we give them a finale they won't forget. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of planning, strategic, tactical, airtight. Julian's team secured digital access to the ballroom's screens and audio systems. Grace curated every piece of evidence like a prosecutor building an unshakable case. James, Julian's head of security, studied the guest list and prepped our fail-safes. Meanwhile, I prepared too, but not just with data. I visited Olivia Che, one of the few designers who hadn't turned her back on me. She hugged me like a sister and said, "Your mother blocked every call I made, but I knew you'd rise." The dress she designed for me wasn't just couture, it was a weapon. Deep crimson, structured shoulders, a silhouette of defiance. "This isn't for elegance," she said, pinning the final hem. "It's for war." And war was coming. The night of the gala, we arrived fashionably late, by exactly 15 minutes. Julian's Bentley slid to a stop in front of the Seasons Hotel, drawing stares. The valet blinked at the car, at his watch, then at us. Inside, the ballroom glittered with ice-white orchids and flickering chandeliers. It was Celeste Vale's masterpiece. Elegance, wealth, legacy. Photos of my parents' perfect life stood on pedestals throughout the room, but none of it could compete with the red dress. Heads turned, conversations stopped. I watched my mother spot us from across the room. She blinked once, smile frozen, eyes narrowing. Her gaze dropped to the dress, to Julian's presence beside me in a custom-tailored tuxedo. And for the first time, I saw it. Doubt. She had no idea what was coming. Julian leaned in and whispered, "Ready?" I nodded. Because tonight wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth. And I was finally ready to tell it. The lights dimmed. The orchestra's music softened into polite background noise. Crystal glasses chimed as Victor Vale's longtime business partner stood and tapped his flute for silence. His toast was everything you'd expect from a man who had practiced every word in the mirror. "Victor and Celeste Vale represent tradition, excellence, family," he said. "They've weathered storms. They've built legacies." Every line carefully crafted. Every glance toward my parents choreographed like theater. 3 more speakers followed. Each reinforced the same story, of resilience, of leadership, of a family dynasty built on trust and virtue. And then, it was her turn. My mother, in ice blue couture flown in from Milan, stepped to the microphone like a queen taking her throne. "We are so grateful for each of you," she began, her voice rich with practiced sincerity. "Our family has faced challenges, yes, but it's through struggle that we return to our values. Family, faith, forgiveness." She scanned the room with benevolent warmth, letting her gaze linger on me. And then she said it. "We'd now like to invite our daughter Cassandra to say a few words, because no matter the past, family is family." The spotlight found me. I stepped forward, crimson gown catching the light like fire. I reached for the microphone, hands steady, heart calm. "Thank you, Mother, and thank you, everyone, for being here to celebrate what you've all been told is a story of triumph." I paused. long enough for the tension to settle in the room. But what if that story isn't the whole truth? The ballroom went still. I was told I failed, that I needed saving, that marrying a man I barely knew would fix the shame I brought to this family. But tonight, I'd like to tell you what really happened. Across the room, my mother's smile tightened. Because the truth is, I said, lifting my eyes to the guests, my fall was not an accident. Julian stepped forward, placing a small remote in my hand. And it was never mine alone. I clicked, and behind me, the screens came alive. The screens behind me lit up like a courtroom slideshow. Wire transfers, tax filings, foundation records, internal emails. My voice didn't shake as I walked the room through every step of the betrayal. 2 weeks before Serena Wexley, my so-called business partner, entered my life, she received a sizable donation from the Vail Foundation. Weeks later, that same woman disappeared with every dollar in our boutique's accounts. Gasps. I clicked again. Here's the email between Warren DuPont and Serena discussing the daughter situation. The date? 3 days before my boutique opened. A third slide appeared. This one is my personal favorite, a note from my mother. Let her fall. We'll be there to catch her. The story needs a redemption arc. The crowd murmured. I saw eyes widen, hands cover mouths. People who once whispered about my downfall now watched it burn in real time, and they couldn't look away. My mother stood slowly, the stage lights catching the sharp glitter in her necklace. This is an emotional outburst, she said coolly. You've clearly been manipulated. By whom? I asked, turning toward Julian. He stepped forward, calm as ever. Allow me to properly introduce myself, he said. Julian Hart, founder and CEO of Hart Capital. The air changed. You could feel it, the collective realization washing through the crowd like a wave. This wasn't just a revenge story. It was a reckoning. On screen, headlines, performance charts, business acquisitions tied to Julian's name. A personal net worth eclipsing not only my father's empire, but most of the room combined. My father's face turned crimson. My mother stopped blinking. Julian's voice remained quiet, firm. This wasn't about money, it was about control, and Cassandra chose to break it. The presentation ended. Silence followed. No one clapped. No one spoke. But I felt something far more powerful than applause. I felt the weight of a lie, lifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I was leading.